Hi, I'm Dave. I work for Google, and I'm going to be talking about what is new in Gerrit 2.15. I hope everybody is really excited at the pace of development in Gerrit, that like just this morning we released 2.14, and now in the afternoon we have 2.15. Actually, it's a little bit longer than that. We have about a 6-month release cycle, and it's been 158 days since 2.15.0 or 2.14.0 was released, and now we're just last night at like 10 p.m. I released 2.15 RC0, so it's like really a thing. It's a moderately large release. I don't know if you remember the numbers that David showed this morning. This is in line with the size of other releases. There are 2,100 commits, 53 contributors from all around the world, different companies, open source contributors, and 7 new contributors who never committed to a previous release. I don't know if any of those are in this room. If they are, thank you. If not, I will thank them remotely. So yeah, there's a bunch of new stuff going on in 2.15. I'm going to talk only briefly about the front end because we had an excellent talk from Logan and Arnab and Dustin this morning who talked about sort of what's happened recently in PolyGerrit, where PolyGerrit is going. I want to give just like a little perspective from my perspective as a maintainer. I do mostly backend work. It's really exciting for the Gerrit project to have like a modern JavaScript environment to develop in. Because it's been historically kind of hard for us to attract front-end developers to the project. They're just, I mean, I'm not going to badmouth Gwt too much, but there are just not as many Gwt developers in the world as there are JavaScript developers. Most people don't understand this system as deeply as we do. And I think that the Gerrit project sort of suffered a lack of UI attention in the past because of that. But now we have a whole team of people at Google. We have a lot of external contributors who are happy to work on modern JavaScript. I think that PolyGerrit has made some big strides in improving the user experience. I think PolyGerrit is also usable. There's like really, everybody who's worked on a software development project, you always have like the attraction of throwing everything out and starting from scratch and like what would you do differently? And I think PolyGerrit is a little bit of that. We understand that we have a lot of users who are used to a certain workflow that we need to preserve, but we also, when writing new code, have the chance to learn from our past mistakes and maybe improve things, maybe make things a little easier to onboard new people. There's a little bit of a preview of what PolyGerrit looks like in 2.15. This was actually kind of a surprise to me because I wrote these slides a few days ago and I had a screenshot, and then at the hackathon yesterday, the PolyGerrit team merged a bunch of CSS changes. So like these buttons with the drop shadow and like the white buttons on the right side of the screen were totally different. I had to redo the screenshot this morning. Actually, last night when after I cut the release, just to make sure it was absolutely accurate. So you can see there's been a good rate of improvement even in like the last 24 hours. Hopefully that will convince you that we'll keep up this pace of development. What is new in 2.15 actually is that we support NoteDb, and we say you should convert your database to NoteDb, which is like super exciting to me. The one thing that I hope will resonate with some people in this room as a motivation for why we're doing NoteDb is that Gerrit administrators also have to be like SQL database administrators, which is sort of like a weird fit. Like you care about version control, you care about software development workflows, and then also for some reason you have to care about database. The idea is we're taking all the data that is currently stored in the database and storing it in a Git repository. So you make a code review and you create a new change. It has some patch sets. It has maybe a topic and all this other metadata, comments on it, reviewers. That all just gets stored in the same Git database as the rest of the code. So that means there are several advantages to doing it this way. For simplicity's sake, as I mentioned, we're only going to have one data store. We don't have to worry about 2 databases that are going to somehow get inconsistent. Consistency is really important because if you've ever tried to back up your Gerrit server, you have like this database, and you have to take a database backup, and you have to take a backup of all the Git repositories. And you pretty much, if you want to have a consistent backup so that everything that's mentioned in the database exists in the Git repository and vice versa, you have to do this while the server is down. There's like no other way to do it because you might get new writes to the database while you're backing up the Git repository and not see that data reflected. But with NoteDb, it's all in a Git repository. And actually, even better, we changed JGit to be able to atomically write multiple refs within a repository, meaning submit a change and also change the state of the metadata to submitted and also add a new patch to that change. That's updating 3 refs. We can update those so that they either all updates succeed or all updates fail. You'll never get in a state where the change was actually merged to the branch, but we didn't update the state in the database. That's just like no longer possible. And that atomicity is what enables us to have consistent backups. NoteDB provides a very helpful sort of audit log. So we had a lot of support problems where we never really knew how a change got into a particular state, because in a database, you just have records, and you update the topic field to say X, and you completely forgot about the fact that the topic field used to say Y. But in Git, as you know, all data is, or the model is that you generally just append commits in a chain. So we'll actually keep track of every operation that's ever happened in a NoteDB database. This really helps a lot with understanding how a change got into its current state. The last 2 points are extensibility and new features. This is like optimistic looking towards the future. We think that plugins will be able to contribute data to NoteDB in a way that you couldn't have a plugin in Gerrit add a new column to an existing table in the database. But the way the format works in NoteDB, that is now possible. I don't think we have any plugins that do this, and we don't provide a framework for it, but the data layer certainly supports it. And we're also going to enable some other kinds of new features, like moving changes between Gerrit hosts without having to throw away code review metadata. OK, so this is the stuff that I've never talked about before. This timeline. So we didn't actually have a complete timeline ever in the past. You can see that there are 5 different years on here. The very first commit to NoteDB was in December 2013. I wrote this thing that was very below the radar. It said, store patch set approvals in a Git notes-based database. That was a long time ago. In 2014, we got an intern. He wrote all the stuff to store inline comments in the database, in the new NoteDB database. Later in 2015, I wrote this thing that I think was actually a good idea in retrospect, but it was a huge amount of work. It's called batch update. It is a thing that allows you to coordinate transactions within 2 separate data stores and have it be kind of a consistent interface. Not really interesting if you're not internal Gerrit developer, but this entire period of time is something that I like to call rewriting every single line of Gerrit. In 2016 is when we actually started migrating GoogleSource.com. Even though we were migrated to NoteDB, ReviewDB data still existed, and it was still the source of truth. So if they got out of sync, we would always trust that data in ReviewDB. And then later this year, actually only a few months ago, we literally in our code, or in our database, we don't have change tables anymore. We have several hundred sites in our multi-master setup, and we have lots and lots of changes, and they're all using NoteDB to store change metadata. So that's pretty exciting. We've been running in production for months. So that's why we think that it could work for other people to run in production who aren't us. Now, fast forward to last night. We releasing Gerrit 2.15. This, like I said before, the big draw here is that this is the first version where we officially support NoteDB. So in the documentation, we're saying we encourage you to try migration. I'll talk a little bit more about that in another slide. Sometime in 2018, we're going to have Gerrit 3.0 and Gerrit 3.1. The reason for this name, Gerrit 3.0, is this is the version where there is no ReviewDB. There is the ability to migrate a site from ReviewDB to NoteDB, but there's no more ReviewDB. If you're running a Gerrit site in 3.0, you're using NoteDB. And Gerrit 3.1 is actually the one that I'm personally most excited about, because we no longer have, even that version, we don't even have to support a migration tool. So we can actually delete all the ReviewDB code, and that will make me very happy. Talk a little bit more detail about how the migration plan is going to look for open source sites. As I mentioned, the migration for GoogleSource.com took us a really long time. We found a ton of issues with our data. So we discovered all these things while we were running our migration, and we fixed them all. So we have this system that scanned all of ReviewDB, did sort of a trial migration to NoteDB, stored that just in memory, and then read the data back out. It's all the same objects in the Gerrit level. There's change and patch set approval. So we could read out the NoteDB versions of those objects, read out the ReviewDB versions of those objects, and just compare them. So some of them, one random example of a bug is some subjects were just truncated in ReviewDB. So the subject is supposed to come, there's a record and change called subject, and it's supposed to come from the first line of the commit message of the patch set. Some of those just we compared the data in Git to the data in ReviewDB, and they didn't match. They were wrong. They were truncated. So if we required NoteDB to have the same subject as ReviewDB, then we would never pass because we have this data that's wrong. So we could go back and fix the data, but actually we just added a special case that's like if the subject starts with the ReviewDB subject, then don't treat it as a difference. And there were many more bugs of that flavor. And there were also bugs like in the NoteDB code that we fixed. It was not just like due to old weird data. It was also, my code was far from bug-free. So the reason that I mentioned how much work we put into getting this right is that I want you to think that this is not like a super scary operation that's going to destroy all your data, because first, we ran it on ourselves, and we fixed a lot of these bugs. And there might be a few more, but we're still pretty confident that it's a safe operation. In 2.15, where there are two kinds of migration tools. So our migration was also especially complicated because we had 0 downtime. We never have any downtime for upgrades. But that experience made it easy for us to write a migration tool that allows you to migrate in 2.15 a Gerrit database from ReviewDB to NoteDB while the server is running. You also have the opportunity to do an offline migration. You can think of this sort of like if you've done a reindex. There's like an online reindex and an offline reindex. You can choose to do it offline. It'll probably be faster, but you have downtime. Or you can choose to do it online, and it might be slower, but you have less downtime. And then in 3.0, we're only going to support an offline migration. This is just like, you can think of it sort of like the way that we do schema upgrades. Like if you upgrade 2 versions, we force you to do an offline upgrade. But if you upgrade just like 1 point release at a time, then you never have to have downtime for your schema migration. Similarly, for NoteDB, if you just go 2.14, 2.15, 3.0, you're never going to have any downtime for upgrades. Might take a little while, but you won't have downtime. So I have here a site. So this is 2.14.4. So I'll stop my server. I will upgrade to 15 RC0. All right, that did like 20 ReviewDB schema migrations. And now we can start the daemon again at 2.15. You can see there's a little online reindex that happened here that is not related to NoteDB. Now that we're in 2.15, we can switch to PolyGerrit, and it looks pretty good. Open a change. I'm going to come back to this little section of the UI after I migrate to NoteDB, because that will change. And we can just relaunch this with an extra flag called migrate to NoteDB. Yeah, so you get all these things about migrating primary storage, blah, blah, blah. It rebuilt 23 changes in 0.8 seconds, which is actually, when I tried this before, it was about 10 times faster than that. And this is on my laptop, so I assume that in your extremely expensive servers, you'll be able to do hundreds or thousands of changes per second. It's like not the most expensive thing in the world. So Hanwen asks, is it parallel? It's parallel if you do it offline. If you do it online, it uses a single thread because we assume that your server is also going to be mostly loaded doing other stuff. And that's why you want, your server is being in use so often that that's why you wanted to do it online in the first place. So we refresh the page. The way that you can tell that this is NoteDB is this hashtag row appeared here. Hashtags are like a new feature that only exists in NoteDB. Incentives to migrate. One thing that I mentioned in that UI is that we have this new feature called hashtags that are like hashtags that you can apply to a change. And for various reasons, we only implemented that in NoteDB. There's other stuff in this category, new features that you should be interested in that are not. The reason that we didn't implement them in ReviewDB is because it would actually be way harder, and they are a more natural fit for NoteDB, such as having the history of all reviewers who have ever been reviewers on the change. As I said, NoteDB keeps track of that natively, and we would have to have a total separate table called reviewer audit if we wanted to do that in ReviewDB, and that was legitimately harder to do. The robot comment stuff that I think David touched on briefly in 2.14, that API, I think is NoteDB only. I hope so, because I put it on this slide. And another new thing that I'm going to talk about at the end of the talk is you can ignore changes, or you can mark changes manually as reviewed to sort of reduce some of the clutter on your dashboard. This is stuff that you can only do if you migrate to NoteDB. So I hope that that is an incentive. What we learned from doing NoteDB, touching every single line of code just takes a long time, especially when there's 1 to 2 people working on it, and Gerrit has I don't know, hundreds of thousands of lines of code. Sean, my manager, who started the Gerrit project, anytime he has to like touch code that touches NoteDB, he's like, I don't even recognize this anymore, even though he still is the #1 contributor to the project. We've changed it almost beyond his recognition. Everything I said so far was about changes. There's also other data in Gerrit besides changes. Accounts are totally migrated to NoteDB. They're actually in 2.15, you have no choice. Really simple file format for how we store data in accounts for NoteDB. But it's not even like a note space format. The name is a little bit of a lie. This is a git config file. Like there's an account section in your config file. It has my full name, my preferred email address, and we have this. This feature is in review to be the account status. So I'm currently giving a talk in England. There are also features for people who don't care about backend stuff. And Alice is going to come up and tell you about one of them.
In 2.15, we improved the way how we compare patch sets against each other and compare how 2.14 and 2.15 would behave in that case. Let's say we just have this little change, one patch set, and we have 2 files on it. In the first file, we just have 1 line. It's on the right side. There's the content. So we just have like the first line modified. And the file consists of 1,000 lines. And we have another file we don't care about at the moment. In it, there are 4 lines changed. So let's say that we look at this file and ask the author of the change to just change another of these lines. And the author takes that change, rebases it to like the latest version of master, and corrects that line. And on the patch set level, when we look on the change screen, how this is described, it's like we have 1 additional line here. Here I have shown what patch set 1 consisted of and what patch set 2 consisted of. So what would you assume should the diff be? I would assume, when I look at that only my file txt is shown with 1 line which is different. So let's just do it and ask Gerrit 2.14 what the result is. And, yeah, what's really happening? Why do we have 420 lines changed in my file and also like 10 additions and 7 removals in the other one? Hey, this wasn't even touched. So, well, maybe let's just look at the content of my file, what is in there. And, well, actually, we remember this line this should really be changed. And this one is not different between those patch sets. But what about this line and this line here? Up to 2.14, we just highlighted all these differences. And that was it. So in 2.15, it should look like that. We try to figure out what happened in between. And all those hunks, those marked lines, which we are sure of, that are introduced by something else, are marked in another color. So like the regular colors are like this red and the green one. And like here this light orange, and this one is a light blue. These are the ones which are introduced by other changes which happen just in between. They're still there, so you're not confused that something which is different is not marked, but you can see that this is something else. And also here, the other file isn't mentioned at all. Something you should know is that this feature only works on PolyGerrit, or at least it's shown. When you're in the video UI, it will still happen in the background. The backend is processing everything, it's just not shown with a color highlighting. So you can just switch to PolyGerrit and you see all these differently colored chunks. The other question is, can I rely on that? Can I trust what I see there? So what we decided is that we make an effort that the orange-blue marked lines are definitely the ones we are sure of. So whenever you see those, you can just say, okay, well, I don't need to look closely at them because they are the ones we are absolutely sure are introduced by other changes which happened in between. For the ones which are marked with the regular colors like red and green, we give no guarantee at all. So they can be introduced by other changes. There might be like from some merge conflicts or whatever. They might also be something which is new. Real example. So you see here, for instance, are the orange parts. Here is something red. Here orange again. And like that, it's much easier to look at the elements which are really important. I linked to another change which really highlights how helpful that is. This is a large file, and we have those green lines here, so we know, okay, this changed really. And when I now move through this whole file, there are a lot of changes, and as a reviewer, I don't really care about them. You see that there are a lot of those diffs, but all of them are in orange or blue. So all of those, except for the one on the imports, all of those below are introduced by other changes, and we mark them. And when we go back, on the change screen here, you also see there are just 2 lines which are added between the patch sets. But when I would just say, okay, well, I just show it to the base, that's what you previously had. Like, I don't want to go through all these changes. And like with 2.14, when I would have said, okay, please show me all those lines which were changed, we would have seen more files here, and we would also have seen not just 2 changed lines, but many, many more.
Does anybody in this room think they know what a draft change is in Gerrit? Some people think that draft changes are like a visibility mechanism. You can say, I only want my reviewers to be able to see this and nobody else. You might also think that they're a way to say that this change is not yet ready for review, and I'm going to leave it in the draft state until it's ready for review. You might want to say, I want to make some small changes that are stored on the server and then like rework those until they're ready. You might also wish there were more gaps in your patch set numbers. Nobody ever wants this, but this is like the #1 thing that people are most confused about with drafts, is that either patch set got deleted so that it really doesn't exist, or a patch set still exists, but you are not a reviewer, so you're not allowed to see it. And worse, this can not even be a gap, but this can be the current patch set. So we get bugs all the time that are like, the UI claims that the most recent patch set is 3, but then I do some operation and it says this patch set is not current. Yeah, so drafts are kind of like a mess for a lot of reasons. Well, for one reason. The one reason is that they're conflating all these things into a single feature. So what we did in 2.15 is we totally killed drafts. So now we have like different little, small, well-scoped features instead of just lumping everything together and call it drafts. There's a bit you can set on changes called private. So private changes are changes that only your reviewers can see. There are work-in-progress changes, which means while the change has the work-in-progress bit set, nobody gets notifications about it. So you could push 30 patch sets that are all somehow incomplete, and your reviewers will not get spammed with 30 emails. And there's another feature that we had prior in like 2.12 or something called change edits that let you make sort of mutable changes on the server side and prepare something that you can then publish. Another thing we did in 2.15 is you have the ability to mark changes as reviewed. So like this is a screenshot from my dashboard this morning. The projector is not super great at distinguishing these, but like these changes are bold and these changes are not bold. So like Gerrit thinks that I need to review these, and it thinks I've already reviewed these. And I just feel like the bold changes are yelling at me and telling me you have to give me your attention. Just like in my email inbox, like anything that's bold is like telling me you have to look at this now. So Gerrit in 2.15, if you are using NoteDb, has the ability to unbold individual changes by clicking a button on the change screen. Or just like in email, you might want to remove some changes from your dashboard entirely, even though you're a reviewer on them. And there's actually an action that you can take unilaterally to remove changes from your dashboard that they cannot undo, called ignoring, which is similar to mute, except it makes the changes go away. So here's a screenshot of my dashboard after I've ignored all these changes. It was really annoying that I couldn't mark these as reviewed manually. It was really annoying that like patch sets disappeared. Here, this was me scratching my own personal itch. I'm really annoyed when I have like a series of changes and like somebody makes code reviews on or comments on them, and I reply to all the comments. I say, yeah, I'm done with this. I'm done with this. I'm done with all these things. And then when I push new patch sets, I'll get like 4 new patch sets and then forget to go back and actually like send these draft comments that say done. So I just added a little push option. So you can say, when you push, you say publish comments, and it'll publish all those drafts. So instead of having to click through every one of these 10 changes in the series and then click reply and see if I have any drafts, and if I have any drafts, then send, well, I can just set an option. And I actually this option is long and hard to remember. And I actually didn't make it easier because there's a user preference. So I highly encourage everybody to just check this box in their user preference screen. And that's the PolyGerrit view. So you should also do it on PolyGerrit. Another user complaint that we got all the time is that like somebody gets a new coworker or somebody transfers to the project, and they want to add them as a reviewer on their first change, and they get this error message that says, my coworker is not a registered user. So we have like sort of partially solved this problem. You can actually add a CC by email address, also only available in NoteDb. There are sort of somewhat technical and/or product reasons why we would not want to be able to add a reviewer, because if somebody's a reviewer, like there's really some accountability that they need to be strongly associated with the change. So we made the choice to say that that somebody has to actually have an account in order to be a reviewer, but just to get an email about it. People use this a lot actually for mailing lists. Like it doesn't have to be a human user, but you can just CC anybody on an email, or CC any email on a code review if you turn on the config option to allow this. Another itch that Hanwen scratched was having better error messages. So sometimes you do a push and you get this, you wait for a little while, and then you get this really helpful error message that says prohibited by Gerrit. Well, that was not very helpful. Turns out it's not actually difficult. Like we wrote all the code that's like check if the user has this permission, if not, fail. We can actually include that permission name in the error message. So this is, you could actually get this message that says this account lacks this permission. And it's not like, it's not perfect because it doesn't say like this is the exact block in like your inheritance hierarchy where the access control came from, but like, you know, this is the problem. It's not a solution, but it's a problem. Robot comments are a feature that we really think will start to ramp up in adoption when more people are using NoteDb. Robots can now suggest fixes, and there's a, you click a button that says apply fix, and it creates a change edit containing your fix, which is kind of nice. Conflicts queries are like the thing that makes the dashboard really, or change screen really slow to load. Those are much faster. Logan fixed a bunch of bugs in our email sending where we thought we were sending emails to reviewers, and we just weren't. We now tested this, and so Logan wrote a really nice test suite that's like 5,000 lines and fixed 1 million bugs. You can delete inline comments if somebody comments about something that they shouldn't have. You can, an admin, not anybody, an admin can delete them. We can explicitly keep track of a change that reverts another change, so you can actually search for this change was definitely reverted. And there's another neat feature in there that you can tell whether it was like a pure revert, whether it was the actual thing that get revert would say, as opposed to claiming that it was a revert, and then you also sneak some other code changes into the revert, which happens all too often, I think. There's better server consistency checks that is available as an admin endpoint. There's new extension APIs for plugins and for dashboards, which I think there were already REST APIs for, and we just now expose them to extensions. And Patrick's new URL scheme, and we are now gone off the page with new features. So that's it. Thank you. And now I guess you can ask me questions while we're waiting for all the other maintainers to come up, or you can just wait for them.